Likora City never slept, but Chief Adebayo Kol-Nwoko had always believed that a man's true life was built in silence. From the outside, his world looked perfect. The Hillcrest District estate stood like a monument to victory. High gates, trimmed hedges, quiet security men who never spoke unless spoken to. Inside lived a man who had dragged himself out of poverty with nothing but discipline, patience, and an unbreakable promise to never return to lack. Adebayo was not born into power. His father had been a roadside mechanic. His mother sold vegetables at dawn. He learned early that dignity was expensive, and shame was costlier than hunger. That was why he worked harder than anyone else. That was why he married late. That was why he protected his name like a sacred object. When Veronica Kol-Nwoko entered his life, she felt like reward, beautiful, soft-spoken in public, the kind of woman that made society nod in approval and say, yes, a man like him deserves that. For a while, he believed he had finally built a home, not just an empire. But slowly, something began to rot. It did not start with cheating. It started with disrespect. Veronica stopped listening when he spoke. She rolled her eyes when he corrected her. She spoke harshly to staff, then smiled sweetly at him, as if cruelty had no witnesses. When he tried to talk, she accused him of being controlling. When he asked questions, she called him insecure. And Adebayo did what many strong men do when love begins to fail. He endured, not because he was weak, but because he feared shame. In Likora City, men could lose money and recover, but a man who lost control of his home became public entertainment. Bloggers, churches, boardrooms, everyone had an opinion. So he stayed quiet, until one evening, standing alone in the massive living room, he noticed something that made his chest tighten. Veronica was smiling at her phone. Not the polite smile she gave him, not the social smile she gave guests. This smile was private, intimate, alive. "Who are you chatting with?" he asked calmly. She locked the phone instantly. "Nobody," she snapped. "Why are you always monitoring me?" That night, her phone vibrated endlessly under the pillow. She turned away from him in bed, and for the first time in years, Chief Adebayo Kol-Nwoko could not sleep. Something whispered inside him, not anger, not jealousy, but truth. And truth, once awake, never sleeps again. Long before Likora City knew the name Adebayo Kol-Nwoko, before Hillcrest District gates rose for him, he was a boy who learned hunger early. He grew up counting coins, not dreams. His father's hands were always black with the grease, fixing engines that never truly belonged to him. His mother woke before sunrise to arrange vegetables by the roadside, praying rain would not scatter her efforts. Adebayo learned something crucial in those years. Poverty does not announce itself. It humiliates quietly. He watched men beg for respect they never received. He watched families pretend they were fine when they were breaking. And at 16, standing beside his mother one evening after a long day of selling, he made a vow that would shape his entire life. "My children will never know this," he promised. "My wife will never lack. My name will never be laughed at." That vow became his engine. While others chased comfort, Adebayo chased structure. He worked without rest. He learned numbers, systems, patience. He failed many times, but he failed forward. When money came, he reinvested it. When success came, he hid it. He understood early that noise attracts enemies. By the time Arum Holdings began to rise, Adebayo had already mastered silence. People wondered why he did not marry early. They whispered that he was cold, too serious, too obsessed with the control. But the truth was simpler. He was afraid to bring a woman into a life that was still under construction. He wanted stability before love, certainty before vulnerability. That was why, when Veronica entered his life years later, she felt like a gift delayed but perfected. She admired his success, praised his discipline, spoke gently about building a future together. To Adebayo, she seemed like peace earned, not chaos invited. What he did not know, what poor boys rarely know, is that some people love the house, not the builder. As Orem Holdings expanded, Adebayo surrounded himself with trusted men. Among them was Daniel Okori, a sharp, smiling deputy who praised loyalty and spoke about legacy. Daniel worked closely with him, learned his habits, studied his silences. Adebayo believed loyalty was mutual. That belief would soon be tested. Back in the present, as Veronica turned away from him in bed, clutching her glowing phone, Adebayo stared into the darkness, remembering the promise he made as a boy. No shame, no laughter, no weakness. He did not yet know how close he was to breaking that vow. But the foundation had already begun to crack. Adebayo told himself that every marriage had seasons. That was the excuse he used each time Veronica changed in ways he could not explain. She began to come home late, too late for casual dinners, too late for honest reasons. When he asked, her answers were always ready but never steady. A friend, a meeting, a headache. Each explanation sounded reasonable on its own, but together they formed a pattern that made his spirit restless. The staff noticed before he did. The housemaids avoided Veronica's eyes. The driver once hesitated before speaking, then lowered his voice. "Sir, madam, they talk to you anyhow these days." Adebayo waved it off. He hated gossip, even when it came from truth. But the disrespect grew bolder. Veronica snapped at him in public. She corrected him in front of guests. She mocked his simplicity, his preference for quiet evenings over loud parties. When he asked her to lower her voice, she accused him of trying to control her. "Is this how you want to cage me?" she shouted one night. "I'm not one of your employees." The words cut deeper than she knew. Adebayo had never raised his hand, never insulted her, never denied her comfort. Yet somehow he found himself apologizing for things he could not name. He questioned his tone, his timing, his presence. Gaslighting works best on men who value peace. At night, she slept with her back to him, phone always close. The screen glowed in the dark like a quiet betrayal. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she typed quickly, hiding the phone the moment he shifted. Once, unable to ignore the knot in his chest, he asked again, softly, "Veronica, are you happy?" She laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Why do you always want to turn everything into drama? If you're insecure, say it." That was the moment he realized something important. She no longer feared losing him. And when love loses fear, it becomes careless. Adebayo sat alone in the living room that night, the Hillcrest mansion unusually loud with silence. He looked around at the walls he had built, the life he had protected, the promise he had made as a poor boy. Something was wrong. Not because she was cheating, he had no proof of that yet, but because respect had left the room first. And where respect dies, betrayal never stays far behind. For the first time, Chief Adebayo Nwoko made a quiet decision. He would stop asking. He would start watching. The lie came dressed like confidence. Veronica stood before the mirror that evening, applying perfume with unusual care. Too much for a simple visit, too deliberate for coincidence. Her dress was fitted, elegant, The kind she wore when she wanted to be seen, not when she wanted to be comfortable. "I'm meeting a friend," she said casually, not turning to look at Adebayo. He nodded. Silence had become his new language. But his eyes followed every movement, the way her hands shook slightly, the way her excitement refused to hide, the way she avoided his gaze, not out of guilt, but impatience. She left the Hillcrest estate at 7:49 p.m. Adebayo waited exactly 2 minutes. Then he moved. He did not call his driver. He did not alert security. He dressed differently. An old jacket, a cap pulled low, glasses that were not his. It was not paranoia. It was instinct. He understood one truth about power. Sometimes, to see clearly, you must remove your identity. He followed her at a distance, careful, invisible. Lecora City lights blurred past as her car crossed into Lecora Island. When she pulled into the driveway of Crown Lux Grand Hotel, his chest tightened, not in rage, but recognition. Crown Lux was not where friendships were renewed. It was where secrets were kept. From the shadows, he watched. Veronica stepped out laughing. A man joined her, young, confident, unfamiliar. She touched his arm. He leaned in too close. They laughed again, unaware that destiny was watching from a parked car across the street. Adebayo did not move. He felt no tears. No shouting rose in him, only a cold stillness, the kind that comes when truth finally removes its mask. He waited until they disappeared into the hotel. Then he stepped out. Inside the lobby, no one recognized him. The disguise worked. He walked past marble floors and quiet elevators like a stranger moving through his own nightmare. Every step down the hallway felt heavier than the last. Room numbers passed slowly. When he reached the door, his heart began to pound, not from fear of what he might see, but from knowing this moment would divide his life forever. He raised his hand. Knock, knock, knock. From inside came a soft giggle, a woman's voice, his wife's voice. The door opened, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. For a moment, Adebayo could not breathe. The hotel room smelled of perfume and betrayal. The lights were dim. The bed was unmade. And there, frozen in shock, stood Veronica, his wife, wrapped in nothing but panic. Beside her was the man, young, half-dressed, confused. Time slowed. Veronica's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her eyes widened as recognition pierced through the disguise. "Adebayo," she whispered, like a prayer she no longer believed in. The man on the bed scrambled backward, pulling a sheet around himself. Fear drained the color from his face. He looked at Adebayo, then at Veronica, as if trying to understand how a night of pleasure had turned into judgment. Adebayo said nothing. He simply stood there, still a stone, watching his marriage collapse in real time. He felt no urge to shout, no desire to strike. Rage would have been easier, but this was heavier. This was the weight of realization. "How long?" he asked quietly. Veronica fell to her knees. "Please," she cried, grabbing his trousers. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain." "Explain." The word tasted bitter. Before he could respond, the door behind him creaked open again. Another figure stepped inside. "Jesus," the woman gasped. Adebayo turned slowly. It was Amaka Rhodes. Veronica's elder sister froze in the doorway, her purse clutched to her chest like a shield. Her eyes darted between the bed, the man, and Adebayo's face, then filled with tears. "You," Adebayo whispered. Amaka shook her head frantically. "I didn't come for this. I was trying to talk to her." Veronica spun toward her sister, rage replacing fear. "Why are you here?" she screamed. "Why now?" The truth began to bleed through the room. Adebayo looked at Amaka again. "You knew," he said. Not a question, but a conclusion. Amaka's lips trembled. "I tried to stop her. I begged her. She said you were old-fashioned, that you didn't understand her." Adebayo laughed, a hollow sound that startled everyone. "Old-fashioned," he repeated softly, for believing marriage still meant something. Veronica sobbed louder, her tears soaking the carpet. The man on the bed shrank into himself, suddenly aware that he was not the center of this storm, just debris caught inside it. Adebayo stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind him. The click echoed like a verdict. This was no longer a secret. This was a reckoning. The room was loud with sobs, but Adebayo heard none of it. Something inside him had shifted. The man who once feared shame more than pain was gone. In his place stood someone colder, clearer. Pain had finished its work. What remained was focus. He looked at Kelvin Rhodes, the young man crouched near the bed, shaking like a leaf caught in a storm. "Stand up," Adebayo said calmly. Kelvin hesitated. "Sir, I didn't know she was married like this." Adebayo turned slowly, his eyes steady. "One more lie," he said quietly, "and you will learn the difference between fear and consequence. Time =0.6s. Kelvin stood instantly. Adebayo turned to Amaka. "Take your phone." Amaka froze. What? What for?" "Photograph everything," Adebayo replied. "The bed, the room, their faces." Veronica screamed. "No, please, don't do this." She crawled toward him, clutching his leg. "I will die of shame. Think of my parents. Think of the church." Adebayo gently removed her hands. "You should have thought of that before tonight." Amaka's hands shook as she lifted her phone. Each click felt like a nail sealing a coffin. Veronica wailed, collapsing to the floor, while Kelvin backed into the corner, muttering prayers he had never learned. "This is cruelty," Veronica cried. Adebayo shook his head slowly. "No, this is documentation." He had spent decades building an empire. He understood contracts, lawsuits, hostile takeovers, and in Licora City, truth without evidence was suicide. When Amaka finished, Adebayo nodded. "Good." He walked to the window, staring down at the city lights. For the first time, he felt something close to peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because uncertainty was behind him. Veronica sobbed uncontrollably. "I was lonely," she whispered. "You were always busy." Adebayo did not turn. "You were greedy," he replied, "and someone used that against you." The words hung in the air. Used. Before anyone could ask what he meant, a loud knock thundered against the door. Boom. Everyone froze. Then came a voice from outside, urgent, panicked. "Sir, Chief Adebayo Kolonwoko, it's hotel security." Adebayo's eyes narrowed. The night was not finished. It was only escalating. The knock came again, harder this time. Boom, boom. Adebayo opened the door a fraction. A uniformed man stood there, sweat shining on his forehead, eyes darting down the hallway like a man running out of time. "Sir," the guard whispered urgently, "we need to move. Now." Adebayo studied him. "Why?" The guard swallowed. "The media is outside the hotel. Cameras, bloggers, live crews. They're forcing the gate." The words landed like a controlled explosion. Behind him, Veronica screamed. No, this can't be happening." Kelvin slid down the wall, clutching his head. Amaka's phone vibrated non-stop in her trembling hand. How would they know? Adebayo asked calmly. The guard leaned closer. Someone tipped them off, sir. They know you followed your wife. They know the room. Adebayo's chest tightened, not with panic, but with realization. This was not coincidence. This was choreography. From outside the room, faint but growing, came the sound of voices. Shouting, footsteps, camera shutters snapping like insects. Chief Adebayo Cole Nwoko, the man who had built everything in silence, was about to be dragged into noise. Veronica crawled toward him again, her dignity completely stripped. "Please," she sobbed, "don't let them see me like this. I'll change, I swear." Adebayo looked down at her. For years, he had protected her from embarrassment, covered her excesses, softened her edges, and still, someone had chosen to use her as a weapon against him. He turned to the guard. "Who sent them?" The guard shook his head. "Unknown source, but the message was detailed, planned." The shouting outside grew louder. "Chief Adebayo, are you inside? Is it true your wife was caught cheating? Sir, say something." Adebayo closed the door gently and locked it. The room felt smaller now, trapped. This was no longer about marriage. This was about war. And for the first time since the door opened, fear touched him. Not fear of loss, but fear of public disgrace. The one thing he had sworn as a poor boy would never touch his name. He breathed in slowly. Someone wanted him broken in public. Someone close. Someone confident enough to light this fire. And Adebayo knew one thing with certainty. He was no longer dealing with betrayal. He was dealing with an enemy. The room vibrated with chaos, but Adebayo stood unmoved. Outside, the journalists' voices overlapped like waves crashing against a sealed door. Inside, Veronica rocked back and forth on the carpet, whispering prayers she had not prayed in years. Kelvin avoided everyone's eyes. Amaka stood frozen, her guilt finally heavier than fear. Adebayo broke the silence. "This did not happen by accident," he said quietly. No one answered. He turned to Veronica. "You don't know bloggers. You don't control media houses. You don't even understand how scandals are planted." She shook her head violently. "I swear, I don't know how they found out." Adebayo knelt in front of her, not in pity, but in precision. "Look at me," he said. Slowly, she did. Her makeup was ruined. Her confidence was gone. For the first time since he had known her, she looked small. "Who has been advising you?" he asked. "Who told you when to leave the house? Who told you tonight was safe?" Veronica's lips trembled. She glanced at Kelvin, then at Amaka, then away. "I can't say," she whispered. Amaka stepped forward suddenly. "You have to," she said, her voice breaking. "This is bigger than you now." Veronica covered her ears. "You don't understand. If I talk, he will destroy me." Adebayo's eyes narrowed. "He..." The single word fell like a stone into water. Kelvin stiffened. Amaka inhaled sharply. Even the guard at the door stopped moving. "A man," Adebayo said calmly. "A man inside my life." Veronica began to cry again, but this time it was different. Not dramatic, not manipulative. This was fear. "He told me you were old," she sobbed. "He said you were stingy. He said you were hiding money from me. He said I should control you, punish you, push you." Adebayo felt a slow burn rise in his chest. Someone had studied his marriage. Someone had whispered poison carefully. Someone had turned weakness into strategy. "Where does this man operate from?" Adebayo asked. Veronica squeezed her eyes shut. "From your world." The truth hung heavy in the air. The enemy was not outside the gates. He was already inside the house. The room fell into a silence so deep it felt unnatural. Adebayo straightened slowly, his mind racing, not wildly, but with terrifying clarity. Years of boardroom battles had trained him to recognize patterns, to trace consequences backward to their source. "From my world," he repeated. "From my company." Veronica nodded weakly, tears dripping onto the carpet. "Yes." Amaka gasped. Kelvin's eyes widened. Even the guard shifted his weight, uneasy. Adebayo took a single step back, as if the truth needed space to breathe. "Say the name," he said. Veronica shook her head violently. "I can't." Outside, the banging intensified. Voices grew louder. Cameras flashed beneath the crack of the door like lightning trying to force its way in. "Say the name," Adebayo repeated. Calm, controlled, final. Veronica's shoulders collapsed. Her voice dropped to a whisper, broken and defeated. "Daniel Okori." The words hit the room like a gunshot. Adebayo blinked. Once, his deputy managing director, the man who called him chairman with respect, the man who handled sensitive files, sat in private meetings, advised on expansion, security, legacy. The man he trusted. "He told me when to leave the house," Veronica sobbed. "He said tonight was perfect. He said he would handle the rest." Adebayo closed his eyes briefly. Daniel Okori, the man who knew his schedules, his blind spots, his fear of scandal. The man who smiled every morning and said, "We are building something timeless, sir." Amaka sank into a chair. "Oh God." Kelvin whispered, "I thought this was just an affair." Adebayo opened his eyes again. They were cold now. "Daniel wanted my name dragged through the streets," he said quietly. "Not yours." Veronica nodded, ashamed. "He said once you were disgraced, the board would panic. Investors would run. Power would shift." Adebayo exhaled slowly. This was not betrayal of the heart. This was hostile takeover by humiliation. Outside, the shouting peaked. "Chief Adebayo, come out now. We know the truth." Adebayo reached into his pocket and felt his phone vibrate. The screen lit up. Incoming call. Daniel Okori. Adebayo stared and said it. Then he smiled, not with joy, but with resolve. The hunter had just called the prey, and the prey was ready. The phone vibrated again in Adebayo's hand. Daniel Okori. The name glowed on the screen like a challenge. Outside, the reporter's shouts collided with the walls. Inside, Veronica sobbed into her palms. Amaka stared at the phone as if it might explode. Kelvin had retreated into silence, his bravado completely erased. Adebayo answered the call and placed it on speaker. "Daniel," he said calmly. A soft laugh came through the phone. Smooth, confident. "So you finally found her," Daniel said. "I heard the cameras are enjoying the show." The room froze. Veronica gasped. Amaka's hand flew to her mouth. The guard stiffened. Adebayo said nothing. Daniel continued, warming to his own voice. "You see, Chairman, this is what happens when powerful men grow sentimental. You built an empire, but you left the doors open." Veronica broke down completely. "You promised me." "Silence," Daniel snapped through the phone. Then amused again. "I told you exactly what to do, didn't I? The time, the place. I told you I'd handle the noise." Adebayo's thumb slid subtly across his screen. "Recording. On." "And why?" Adebayo asked quietly. Daniel chuckled. "Because Aurum Holdings needs new leadership. You're careful, slow, obsessed with reputation. The board wants aggression, vision. I deserve what you built." There it was. Not rumor, not suspicion. Confession. Adebayo let the silence stretch, long enough for the truth to echo. "My security team is on the way to your house," Adebayo said evenly. "So is law enforcement." The laughter stopped. "What?" Daniel snapped. "You wouldn't dare." "I've recorded everything," Adebayo replied, "including your plan to manipulate the media, sabotage my marriage, and destabilize my company." For the first time, fear crept into Daniel's voice. "Adebayo, listen." The banging outside grew louder. The door shook. Boom, boom. Adebayo ended the call. He slipped the phone into his pocket and straightened his jacket. The trap had failed. The hunter had confessed. And the empire, though shaken, still stood. The door shook again, harder this time. "Open up," a voice shouted from the hallway. "Chief Adebayo, we know you're inside." The guard stepped forward, panic edging his voice. "Sir, they'll break it down any moment." Adebayo looked around the room, not with fear, but finality. The bed, the scattered clothes. The woman he once loved crouched on the floor, reduced by her own choices. For a moment, Veronica looked up at him with naked desperation. "Please," she sobbed, "don't leave me here. If they see me like this, my life is finished." Adebayo's expression did not change. "You finished it yourself," he said quietly. He turned to the guard. "There's an emergency stairwell, correct?" "Yes, sir. 2 doors down. Lead straight to the service basement." Adebayo nodded. As the pounding intensified, Amaka rushed toward him. "What about her?" she asked, glancing at her sister. Adebayo paused, not in hesitation, but in acknowledgement. "I built my life avoiding shame," he said. "Tonight, I choose truth instead." He stepped toward the door. Veronica lunged, grabbing his sleeve. "I'll change. I'll testify for you. I'll do anything." Adebayo gently freed himself. "You already have," he replied, with one final look, calm, controlled, unbroken. He followed the guard into the narrow corridor behind the wardrobe, disappearing just as the reporters' voices exploded outside the main door. Veronica's scream echoed behind him. But Adebayo did not turn back. Some exits are not escapes. They are decisions. By morning, Lakora City was awake with rumors. Screens glowed with headlines. Clips replayed endlessly. Commentators debated morality, power, and shame. Some mocked, some sympathized. Most speculated. But Chief Adebayo Kolonwoko did not watch. He stood alone on the balcony of a quiet safe house overlooking the city he helped build, the air cool against his face. For the first time in many years, his phone was silent, not because the storm had passed, but because the truth had landed. By dawn, Daniel Okori was in custody. The recording had done what shouting never could. Boards froze his access. Accounts were locked. Allies vanished. The man who tried to inherit an empire through humiliation discovered that confession is heavier than ambition. Veronica's face filled the screens for days. Tears, apologies, silence. The city moved on, cities always do. But lessons remained. Adebayo did not celebrate. He filed for divorce without drama. He released a short statement. No insults, no explanations, just facts. In Lakora, restraint spoke louder than rage. Investors steadied, employees returned to work. Aram Holdings endured. What surprised everyone was what came next. Adebayo began to speak, quietly, deliberately, about boundaries, about evidence, about respect as the first currency of love. He reminded young men that silence is not weakness, but ignoring truth is. He reminded leaders that enemies rarely knock from outside. They sit close, smile often, and wait. He kept his promise. there would be no laughter at his name, not because he hid his pain, but because he faced it without spectacle. As the sun rose over Licora City, Adebayo turned back inside. The future was uncertain, but his footing was firm. Empires could shake, marriages could fail, reputations could be tested. But a man who learns, documents, and acts with dignity does not fall. He rebuilds, stronger, wiser, and awake.